Imagine finding a stone cross buried in southern India, with inscriptions in a language that's been dead for over 1,000 years. Now imagine discovering that this cross might be the only physical evidence proving that one of Jesus' 12 apostles actually made it there. This isn't fiction. It's exactly what archaeologists found, and the story behind this discovery will shake everything you think you know about early Christianity. But before I reveal the secret carved into this ancient stone, you need to know about the man behind this impossible journey. And when I say impossible, you'll understand why. The man in question was known for a trait we'd consider a flaw today. He doubted everything. His name was Thomas, and he starred in one of the most embarrassing moments in biblical history. When the other disciples told him they'd seen Jesus risen from the dead, Thomas simply said, "I don't believe it. Unless I put my finger in the nail marks and place my hand in his side, I will not believe." Imagine the tension in that moment. Jesus had just conquered death. The disciples were ecstatic, and Thomas asked for physical proof. Sound familiar? It's exactly what many of us would do today. But here's the first mystery. How did this same skeptical man become the most daring missionary in history? And more importantly, how did he end up disappearing in a country over 4,000 miles from Jerusalem, leaving behind evidence that archaeologists are still trying to decipher? The answer lies in the riskiest decision ever made by Jesus' disciples. After the ascension, they gathered to divide the world into missionary territories. Peter would take the Jews, Paul the Gentiles of the Roman Empire. And Thomas? Thomas received the mission nobody else wanted, evangelizing the lands beyond the Roman Empire, at the ends of the known world. We're talking about an era when traveling from Palestine to India was literally a life or death journey. There was no GPS, no hotels, not even reliable maps. You had to cross scorching deserts, freezing mountains, territories controlled by hostile tribes, and all while carrying a religious message completely foreign to local cultures. But Thomas accepted. And here's the second mystery. Why would anyone choose the most dangerous mission? Remember, we're talking about the man who doubted the resurrection. What could have happened in that encounter with Jesus that transformed a skeptic into an adventurer willing to die for his faith? Thomas's journey began following the trade routes that connected the Mediterranean to the east. First, he would have traveled the Silk Road, preaching in cities that are now part of Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. Christian communities in these regions still claim to have been founded by him today. But India was his final destination. And once there, Thomas would do something that would forever change the history of Christianity. He didn't try to impose Jewish or Roman culture. Instead, he studied local traditions, learned native languages, and found connection points between Christianity and Indian philosophies. It was a revolutionary strategy for the time, and it worked better than anyone could have imagined. The communities he established didn't just survive, they thrived. And here's where the story gets truly fascinating. These communities preserved Christian practices that disappeared in the West. They maintained liturgies in Aramaic, the language Jesus spoke. They preserved texts that the Catholic Church considered apocryphal. And most impressively, they developed a unique Christian tradition that combines elements of early Christianity with Indian cultural sensibilities. But none of this would be so convincing if it weren't for the discovery I mentioned at the beginning. The stone cross found in Mylapore near Chennai isn't just a religious symbol. It's a historical document carved in granite, 6 feet tall, with inscriptions that challenge our understanding of early Christian expansion. The inscriptions are in Pahlavi, an ancient Persian language used on trade routes in the 1st century. But the symbols are unique. Doves representing the Holy Spirit, lotus flowers adapted to a Christian context, and decorative patterns that echo both Byzantine art and South Indian artistic traditions. It's as if someone had created a cultural fusion 1,500 years before the concept existed. But here's the detail that keeps archaeologists up at night. The cross displays stylistic features that weren't common in Western Christianity at the time. This means either it was created by someone who had direct knowledge of primitive Eastern Christian traditions, or it's genuinely old enough to have been created when those traditions were still alive, and the evidence doesn't stop at the cross. The St. Thomas Christian communities, concentrated mainly in the state of Kerala, maintain traditions that predate the division between Eastern and Western churches. Their liturgies follow ancient Syrian patterns. Their ecclesiastical hierarchies differ from both Catholicism and Protestantism, and their sacred texts include writings that aren't part of the traditional Bible. It's as if they've preserved a time capsule of first-century Christianity, untouched by the reforms and counter-reforms that shaped Western Christianity. But Thomas's story in India has a tragic ending that, paradoxically, strengthens its historical credibility. According to local traditions, he was martyred in 72 AD, killed by a spear while praying on what is now known as St. Thomas Mount. The exact location of his death became a pilgrimage center that attracts Christians from around the world. What makes this martyrdom particularly interesting is that it doesn't follow the typical heroic pattern of religious legends. There are no spectacular miracles, no last-minute mass conversions, no divine interventions. Thomas simply died as a lonely missionary in a distant land, leaving behind small communities of converts and some mysterious artifacts. This simplicity, curiously, is what makes the story more convincing to historians. Legends tend to be dramatic and full of supernatural elements. Historical facts tend to be more mundane, even when extraordinary. But not all experts are convinced. Skeptics argue that the St. Thomas traditions may have emerged centuries later as a way to confer apostolic prestige to Christian communities that developed through other influences. After all, several Christian communities around the world claim apostolic foundation, and they can't all be right. Defenders of the Thomist tradition, on the other hand, point to the consistency of archaeological evidence, the continuity of cultural practices, and the proven antiquity of Indian Christian communities. They argue it's harder to explain how these traditions arose than to simply accept they're based on real events. And here's where the mystery deepens even more. Recent analyses of the St. Thomas Cross have revealed details that weren't visible to the naked eye. Advanced imaging techniques have shown additional symbols and patterns, suggesting impressive artistic sophistication for the time. Even more intriguing, some inscriptions appear to include references to specific events that correspond to traditional narratives about Thomas's mission. It's as if the stone were a puzzle left specifically for future generations to decipher, a silent testament to one of history's most audacious missionary journeys. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this entire story is what it reveals about the nature of early Christianity. Far from being a monolithic religion that spread uniformly from Jerusalem, Christianity in the first centuries was incredibly diverse and adaptable. Christian communities in different regions developed unique practices, liturgies, and traditions, all while maintaining fidelity to the core Christian message. The St. Thomas communities in India represent one of the purest expressions of this early diversity. They show us how Christianity might have developed without the influence of Roman imperial power, without the theological controversies of ecumenical councils, and without the denominational divisions that characterized later church history. And this brings us back to the stone cross that began our journey. Whether it's a genuine first-century artifact or a later creation inspired by ancient oral traditions, it represents something profound about human faith. It speaks to us of people willing to travel to the ends of the earth to share a message they believed in deeply. It tells us about humanity's capacity for adaptation and cultural synthesis. And it preserves, carved in time-resistant granite, the memory of one of history's most extraordinary spiritual adventures, the man who once doubted the resurrection until he could touch Jesus' wounds became, according to tradition, the apostle who traveled farthest to spread the Christian faith. His journey from doubt to audacious missionary faith mirrors, in many ways, the journey many believers make in their own spiritual lives. And perhaps that's exactly what makes Thomas's story in India so fascinating. It's not just about a man and his impossible mission. It's about human transformation, about how doubts can become certainties so deep they motivate extraordinary sacrifices. It's about how faith can build bridges between seemingly incompatible cultures. And it's about how legacies can survive, not just in texts and traditions, but literally carved in stone, waiting for future generations to discover and decipher their messages. The cross that rests today in Chennai continues to be an archaeological mystery, a religious relic, and a symbol of one of the most audacious journeys in human history. And each new analytical technique, each additional archaeological discovery, each study of the St. Thomas Christian communities adds another piece to the puzzle that is the story of the apostle who disappeared in India, leaving only a trail carved in stone to tell his extraordinary adventure.